The UN Human Rights Council has published a devastating report stating very clearly that Israel has committed war crimes and crimes against humanity in Gaza, including the crime of extermination of the indigenous Palestinian people, along with the crime of forced transfer, that is ethnic cleansing, along with torture and a litany of other egregious offenses. UN human rights experts have also emphasized that Western governments that are supporting Israel and arming it are complicit in these crimes against humanity that are being committed.
Israeli authorities are responsible for war crimes, crimes against humanity, and violations of international humanitarian and human rights law, including extermination, intentionally directing attacks against civilians and civilian objects, murder or willful killing, using starvation as a method of war, forcible transfer.
This was detailed in a report that was published by the UN Human Rights Council this June, and it's officially called the Report of the Independent International Commission of Inquiry on the Occupied Palestinian Territory and Israel. And this is a body that was created by the UN Human Rights Council in order to investigate these war crimes committed in Gaza. And it features leading human rights experts, experts on international law. And they wrote in this report that, quote, Israeli authorities and members of the Israeli security forces committed war crimes, crimes against humanity, and violations of international humanitarian law and international human rights law. The Israeli crimes include the war crime of starvation as a method of warfare, intentionally directing attacks against civilians and civilian objects, forcible transfer, that is ethnic cleansing, torture, siege, collective punishment, and furthermore, they note that Israel has committed the crime against humanity of extermination. In a press conference on this UN report, one of the top human rights experts stated very clearly that the Israeli army is one of the most criminal armies in the world. Speaking here is the Australian legal expert Chris Sidoti, who was previously the commissioner of the Australian Human Rights Commission. The UN Human Rights Council selected him in order to investigate war crimes committed in Gaza. This is what he had to say after investigating.
You mentioned the Israeli army is the most moral army in the world. This is something that is said repeatedly by the current Prime Minister of Israel, Netanyahu. What I do have expertise in and what I do have authority to do is make assessments of criminal conduct. And we've done that in relation to the recent events, and you can see that in the report. And the only conclusion you can draw is that the Israeli army is one of the most criminal armies in the world. But I'll leave morality to Netanyahu to determine.
The chair of this UN committee that was created to investigate war crimes in Gaza was the South African legal expert Navi Pillay. She was previously the UN High Commissioner for Human Rights. And in the press conference detailing the results of this report, this top UN legal expert noted how people from the north of Gaza move south and suddenly they get attacked in the south. So Israel has clearly shown an attitude of not caring for Palestinians' lives, destruction, and dislocation. She added that there is very clear Israeli intention of forcible dislocation of people just to force them out. That is ethnic cleansing. And furthermore, she emphasized that Israel could not commit these crimes without third-party support, that is from Western governments, primarily the United States. She said that, quote, had it not been for the help of powerful countries, Israel would not have been able to carry out this perpetual occupation of sovereign Palestinian territory. This is a top UN legal expert saying very clearly that it's not just Israel that is carrying out crimes against humanity, but also its Western allies that are directly complicit in these crimes. Another UN legal expert, Francesca Albanese, who is the UN Special Rapporteur on the occupied Palestinian territories, she described Israel's war on Gaza as, quote, one of the most well-documented and boasted about G-sides in history. I don't say that word because then this will be demonetized and removed from the algorithm and it won't get very many views. But she said very clearly that Israel is committing the crime of G-side, and this is one of the most well-documented examples in history. And in particular, this UN expert was speaking about the Israeli attack on Gaza in June in Nuseirat, in which in one day, Israeli forces killed nearly 300 Palestinians and wounded nearly 700. That is 1,000 casualties approximately in just one day. She referred to this as going down in history as one of the most appalling examples of disdain for Palestinian life. This UN legal expert added that, quote, justice will knock on the doors of the perpetrators and their accomplices, the sycophants committed to whitewashing Israel's crimes while vilifying advocates for justice will have what they deserve, oblivion in the dustbin of history. Of course, I should also add that the top UN legal authority, the International Court of Justice at The Hague, said in a ruling that Israel can be investigated for the G crime. And furthermore, in a separate ruling, the ICJ at The Hague also called on Israel to stop its attack on Rafah in Gaza, where roughly 1 million Palestinian civilians were trapped, and Israel completely violated this ruling from The Hague. Furthermore, the prosecutor of the International Criminal Court, also at The Hague, has applied for arrest warrants against top Israeli officials, including Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and Defense Minister Yoav Gallant. And Israel attacked the ICC in response, and the US government attacked the ICC and threatened to impose sanctions on the ICC for daring to try to hold Israeli officials to account for their crimes against humanity. Here I'm going to play a clip from the press conference that was held by the UN legal experts. These are the members of the UN Commission on War Crimes Committed in Gaza. And it's quite incredible to hear how clearly they state that Israel is committing the worst possible atrocities imaginable.
In relation to Israel's military operations and attacks in Gaza from 7th October, we conclude that Israeli authorities are responsible for war crimes, crimes against humanity, and violations of international humanitarian and human rights law, including extermination, intentionally directing attacks against civilians and civilian objects, murder or willful killing, using starvation as a method of war, forcible transfer. Israel's total siege of the Gaza Strip has weaponized the provision of life-sustaining necessities for strategic and political gains, including through cutting off supplies of water, food, electricity, fuel, and other essential supplies, including humanitarian assistance. It constitutes collective punishment, disproportionately impacting pregnant women and persons with disabilities, and is causing grave harm to children, including starvation-related deaths. We found that the immense numbers of civilian casualties in Gaza and widespread destruction of civilian objects and infrastructure were the inevitable result of an intentional strategy to cause maximum damage, disregarding the legal obligations of distinction proportionality, and adequate precautions. Israel also forcibly transferred almost the entire population into small enclosures that are unsafe and uninhabitable. The deliberate use of heavy weapons with large destructive capacity in densely populated areas constitutes an intentional and direct attack on the civilian population.
Now, the last thing that I want to say here before concluding is that supporters of the colonial Israeli regime will often try to both sides the situation and say, well, the Palestinians are also committing war crimes and blah, blah, blah. And the United Nations, which is run by, many Western officials, the UN is actually very biased in the interests of the West, which is why it's rare to see these kinds of comments made by top UN experts. So because it's very biased in the interest of the West and it's biased against the global South, the UN also contributes to making this false equivalence, this false binary between the oppressor and the oppressed, the occupied and the occupier. And in this report, they also accused Palestinians of war crimes. But this is also very misleading because in international law, it states very clearly that the people living under illegal military occupation have a right to resistance, including armed resistance. This has been written clearly in international law. It has been reaffirmed also in numerous UN General Assembly resolutions that the Palestinian people who have lived for decades under an illegal Israeli military occupation have a right to resist with armed force against Israeli occupation with the support of the Western colonial powers. So don't allow the supporters of this colonial regime that is committing crimes against humanity and ethnic cleansing, do not allow them to try to distract from this fact by trying to make a false equivalence. There is no equivalence between oppressor and oppressed, between people carrying out an occupation and people living under decades under that illegal military occupation. On that note, I'm going to conclude here. I'm Ben Norton. I am the editor-in-chief of Geopolitical Economy Report. I want to thank everyone for joining me today. Please like and subscribe. Please share this, and I will see you all next time.